You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, it's Mighty Blue again, and you are listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, sponsored for the second straight week by Terry Kidder, a Young Living essential oils independent distributor. More about Young Living in a moment. This week, we've got a really touching story about a young man who hiked in 2018 amid all sorts of family and emotional issues going on. His name is Andrew Haverstick, or Gandalf, and he truly has a story to tell that's going to grip you. As you know, I've been reaching out to various hostels I stayed in during my 2019 thru-hike, and surprisingly, it's been difficult to tie anybody down this week to record, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to chat with the host of another current podcast on the Hiking Radio Network, and a hoofmaker, the Grand Poobah of the Trail Dames and host of the Trail Dames podcast. It's very appropriate that I'm speaking with Anna today, as she has a few gift ideas for the hiker in your life in her most recent episode. Finally, after moving through Harper's Ferry and passing the halfway mark, Paul Stutzman describes a horrendous storm that he experienced. Certainly it was much worse than anything I went through on the trail this year. Now, before we get to Gandalf, let's hear about this week's sponsor. Do you think your pack has everything you need? Think again. Get prepared for the upcoming hiking season by stuffing your stocking with Young Living essential oils and products. Whether it's Panaway oil to soothe those aching feet, or all-natural bug repellent without the chemicals, coconut oil-based lip balm, or a boost to your brain power with Ningxia Nitro. Young Living can meet your needs. You'll be surprised by the number of things that Young Living Essential Oils has for you as a hiker. Terry Kidder, the sister of our very own Jester section hiker, can help you this holiday season. For more info on how to get your very own Basic Essential Oils hiker pack, or a gifter pack to your very favourite trail lover, text the word hiker to 937-848-1630. I really hope that some of you take up Terry's offer to text hiker to 937-848-1630. You'll get a great offer, and Terry will be delighted that she sponsored the show. Thanks, Terry. Let's hear from a young man now who emailed me a few weeks ago with a very poignant story. I really wanted him to share it with you all, so let's listen to Andrew Haverstick, or Gandalf. We're on with a young guy today, Andrew Haverstick. Actually, he's not quite as young as he looks. I've got him on the picture here, and you'll see in the pictures he is a whole lot younger than his age. He's actually 29, aren't you, Andrew?
Yes, 29.
Okay. Well, hi anyway, and how are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you, Steve?
Not too bad. And you contacted me recently and told me that you felt that you had a story to tell.
I did.
Yeah. And that our listeners would really like that, and that we spoke the other day, and yours is a very, very poignant story. We're going to come to it bit by bit, obviously. Mm-hmm. So, but first, I'd like you to tell us how it was that you got to the trail in the first place. What made you want to get on this trail?
Well, it started when I was in 5th grade. My teacher at the time took a sabbatical and actually hiked the Appalachian Trail and sent all of his students postcards from different places on the trail. So,
what an awesome thing that is, by the way.
Yeah, that was neat. So that was sort of planted the seed in my mind, and over the years, the idea grew and grew, and I started thinking about it very seriously, probably around 2014, 2015, and actually at that time, too, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer.
All right.
And so I knew that I couldn't leave during that time. It was important for me to be home with my family at that time.
Sure.
So as she battled the cancer, it was a 2.5-year battle. She passed away in April of 2017.
Okay.
And so throughout that time, I had decided that I was going to do the trail. I didn't know when, but I had decided that this was something that I wanted to and maybe needed to do.
Why did you think you needed to do it?
I just thought, since that initial exposure to it in 5th grade, I just was always intrigued by it, the idea of walking across 14 states and just
crazy, aren't we?
Yes, yeah, just living in the woods. I've always sort of been an outdoors person, so it was just intriguing to be able to do that. So yeah, I decided that I was going to do it, and after Mom passed away, I picked a date and went for it.
Wow, amazing. So tell us then, were you able to tell your mother before she passed what your plans were, and if you were, how did she react to it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was able to tell her, thankfully. Both my parents together. I remember the day actually. It was in the winter, January, but it was a beautiful sunny day, and it was a warmer day. I'm from Pennsylvania, so it was warmer that day. We were sitting out on the back porch, and I said, I've been thinking about doing this walk. And they said, oh, okay. What kind of walk? They were both aware of the Appalachian Trail, what it was and everything. And, but yeah, they were both very supportive. Obviously she worried the way that a mother would, and there was probably nothing that I could say to fully reassure her, but,
absolutely not. Yeah.
But yeah, she was encouraging and supportive right up until, she passed away. So I was thankful to have that support.
So was your father also supportive?
He was, yes. I think he was probably even more supportive than she was. Right. Just, over the years, he worked very hard to support the family, and so was just always very supportive of my brother, sister, and me in what we did, even if, it was...
stupid. If it was stupid. That was the word you were looking for, wasn't it?
That's probably the word I was looking for, yes.
Yeah, so, and it is a stupid thing to do, as we all know. So now, and you mentioned when we spoke before that you've been a weekend hiker and a day hiker. You've done a few things in terms of hiking, and you've done a few overnights and that. How quickly, once you got on the AT at Amicalola, how quickly did you realise that this was something entirely different?
Well, the very first day, I started hiking at 9, and then it started raining, hard rain at probably 11 or 11:30, and continued on the rest of the day and into the night. Nice. So very quickly I realized the importance of waterproof gear and, staying warm and everything like that. But I would say it really set in what I was doing at the NOC, which is... I don't remember the mile, but somewhere around 200, I would say. Maybe less.
About that,
yeah.
I think it might be a little bit less, actually. You're right, yeah.
But yeah, I don't know what it was, but I realized, okay, well, this is it for the next, 4 months or whatever it is. And so, yeah, I think, that's really when it set in.
Yeah, I mean, and it is something that kind of you get into some sort of rhythm that you don't know you're getting into until you're in it, do you?
Right.
Night, day after day, night after night, same food after same food.
Yep.
Yeah, and generally living the life of a bum is becomes quite an attractive proposition, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. When you're looking from the outside, you think, why would you ever want to do that? But once you're in it, it's just, I don't know. There's something inexplicable about it that just draws you in.
You think, why would you ever want to do anything else when you're
Well, that's true, yeah.
Yeah. I kind of did. By the way, and looking at you now, once again, the audience can't see you right now, but your name was Gandalf, and you look zero like him. So what's that all about?
I carried a long tobacco pipe.
Well, why?
Well, just to smoke, of course, as I relax at the end of the day in my tent. I mainly said it was to hide the hiker stench, or at least try to help hide the hiker stench, but yeah.
Never does, does it?
Never does.
So you went in last year, 2018, didn't you?
Yes.
And you're actually 29 years old, I believe. And you turned 30 on the trail or not?
No, I was 28 on the trail actually. Turned 29 shortly after I got home.
Okay.
Yep.
And that's becoming more of a regular age, if regular is the word. Because people are normally in a career by then, working and doing whatever they're doing. They're either old gits like me, or they're youngsters just out of college or just about to go to college. So how were you able to logistically make that work for you in terms of working and stuff?
Well, I guess I took the plunge and quit my job. It was
Excellent.
a job that it was a job that I really enjoyed. I Really enjoyed the employer that I was working for. It was a small company, so I really enjoyed it, but just felt the need for something different. And I thought, if there's a time in my life when I'm going to do this hike, now this is it. So just decided to go for it.
Did you meet many others like that? And the reason I ask is that I've noticed one of the differences in my two hikes from 2014 to 2019 is the number of people of your generation. That I'm not patronising you at all, but you know what I mean. No, of your age who are prepared to say, "Sod it, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to do something else that I really want to do," and then not worry about what they're going to do when they get back. Did you find quite a few people in that same situation?
I did find that, yeah. I don't know whether our generation is more adventurous, or I don't know. I don't know the reason. But yeah, I would say that was very true, that I found a lot of peers just didn't feel that they wanted to stay in the corporate world or the working world or whatever. So decided to live like a bum in the woods for 5 months.
Quite right. So you started out, and I'm sure part of the process was getting over the loss of your mother and processing the grief. Did you find the amount of time it gave you was helping you with that? Because it does give you time to think about all sorts of things when you're out there, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Or I was going to say, in my case, I started driving myself crazy because there was almost too much time to think. Did you find sometimes you had too many thoughts in your head?
Yes, like you said, you have so much time to think as you're walking. So I kept a written journal.
All right.
Not so much to help with processing and to track down thoughts, but more just to keep the day to day. But one thing that I found to be helpful was just spending time in prayer as I would walk.
Right.
Just, I found that I very seldom spoke out loud as I was praying, but I just found being in the woods by myself, and listening to the birds and the water and everything to be very therapeutic, and just the opportunity to pray as I walked, I found very valuable.
Really? Yeah. Did you find you were doing that quite a lot during the day?
Well, yeah, generally I would spend most of the morning walking in silence, just listening to the woods or spending time in prayer. And then towards the afternoon, if I needed a little extra motivation, I would listen to music or a podcast or something.
Of course.
But yeah, generally I would try to, as I was in the woods, just try to enjoy what I was doing and really just focus on being thankful for the opportunity that I had to be able to just go and do what I was doing.
Sure. Well, we are actually going to return to prayer later on, and I want to talk to you about something that happened later as well. But yeah, and as an aside, you mentioned at one stage that you listen to my podcast sometimes, and one of the things I said on my journey this year was the lack of options, and this is becoming more and more of a thing in my mind, and how nice it is to have so few options on the trail. And you said you agreed with that very much so, didn't you?
Yeah, that really resonated with me. Just the fact that you have, okay, yeah, you can decide to jump off trail at this town or whatever, this road crossing. Basically, you have one option, and that is to just keep walking, keep moving forward. And yeah, I found that to be, I really resonated with that when you said it in one of your recent episodes. Yeah.
Yeah, there's certainly a simplicity to it. And how much planning were you able to do? Because of course your mother passed, and I know you'd already decided to go by then. How long did you actually have to plan for this trip?
It was, let me think now. Well, the big scope of it is since 5th grade, but realistically, I would say maybe 2 or 3 months.
And that was putting together your gear, wasn't it, I presume? Because you've done the weekend backpacking stuff. I presume you changed out quite a bit of it, didn't you?
Right. I did, yes. And even before I left for the trail, I changed out quite a bit. And then once on the trail, I also changed out quite a bit. So yeah, a lot of that was just researching gear and making sure I had a lot of what I wanted and things that I thought would work out well. And
so what did you get new then? What'd you have to change new?
A new sleeping quilt. That was one of the main things, and then also a tent. I used the big Agnes Fly Creek 2-person,
Right.
which that extra space was invaluable.
Totally. You can't go for a single tent. I don't know why anybody would ever dream of doing
Right.
that. Yeah.
And then I started with hiking boots, regular, just, run-of-the-mill hiking boots. But then partway through the trail, switched to trail runners, which I was, everyone around had trail runners, and I thought I'd give them a try. And so, yeah, that worked out pretty well also.
Yeah, you said you switched out things once you got on the trail. And I find that interesting. You do so much research about what's going to work for you, but until you actually try your gear out on the trail in real trail conditions, you just don't know what's going to work for you, do you, until you get there?
Right. Yeah, you can do all the research you want and read other people's experiences, but it was funny. I was with another guy for 500 miles, and we had nearly identical setups with the tent. And he would set his up a certain way, and I would set mine up a certain way, and it was a little bit different, and we had the same piece of equipment, but we just found what worked for us, and that was the biggest lesson that I learned, is you just have to go and do it and find out what works for you, and then stick with it.
Yeah, you would not believe the number of people who write to me asking my advice about certain gear or certain doing it in certain ways. And you will probably get this as well from time to time. People will ask you. All I know is how to get there for myself. I know how I can get me there.
Right.
I've got and I couldn't tell you exactly how I did it, but I got there in the end. But with other people, you just have to work these things out yourself just by using them, don't you? What works for you and what doesn't work for you. And if you rely too much upon what other people say, you will almost certainly end up with the wrong gear. You've just got to try stuff out and see what works for you, don't you?
Yeah, I think that's very true. Yep, I think you're right.
Yeah. So you had a really cold start. 2018, I remember, was a brutally cold time.
It was.
Bruce Mattson went that year, and we covered his journey on a separate podcast. How did you find it, or were you okay with hiking in the cold, or did you actually have decent gear at the time?
I think that I was pretty well equipped gear-wise with what I had, clothing and everything. People would always sort of look at me funny because I would, if my rain jacket was dry, I would wear it inside my sleeping bag on top of all of my other layers.
Of course.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's low teens with the wind chill. I'm going to wear every shred of clothing that I have here.
Darn right, yeah.
Yeah, as long as I kept moving, I was able to stay warm enough. And in my tent, those bitter, bitter cold nights, people will say, well, were you warm? I say, well, I wasn't warm, but at least I wasn't shivering and, I wasn't afraid of hypothermia or anything like that.
It's funny. Somebody referred to it the other day as type 2 entertainment or type 2 fun, and it really made me laugh. I never really worked out what that meant, and then really she explained it to me. And it really is when you're out there and you're freezing cold and you're in your tent and in your quilt and you're covered up with everything. You think, what on earth am I doing here? But you still want to stay there, so it's kind of weird. I must say, yeah.
Yep.
So. And I know that you started by yourself, like most people do. Did you join up with a bunch of people, or did you tend to be by yourself most of the time?
I would say generally during the days I was alone, or maybe with one or other two people, and then the nights we would tend to congregate, and someone would build a fire, or we'd be staying around a shelter or a water source or whatever. So yeah, and I seem to really enjoy that. Just everyone does their own thing throughout the day and then sort of meet up at camp at night again.
Yeah, and it kind of is that way, but you do find yourself drifting into a tramley, don't you, in many ways?
Yes.
It might only be 100 miles here, 200 miles there. I mean, I was 1,700 miles with the same guy at the end. But generally, that's what you do. You kind of drift into a family. Was there anybody you were with for a very long time?
Yeah, there was a one guy. He actually was English too. His name was Mumbles. He and I were together for 500 miles, I think.
All right.
And then the only reason we got separated was because I think, I don't know for sure, but all signs point to getting food poisoning from a restaurant that we stopped at, and I had to stay in the hostel for 4 days because I could barely walk without. Yeah, it It was not pretty. I lost 15 pounds from getting sick, and I was in rough shape. Yep.
15 pounds in 4
yeah.
days. My gosh, could have had a leg off for that.
I could have. Yep.
Oh dear. So, did you ever, when the weather was so bad, did you ever consider quitting at all, or was that never a consideration?
No, quitting was never an option for me. I set a target for myself to make it to Katahdin, and that's, unless some sort of injury or something outside of my control took me off, that's what I was going to do.
And talking of which, is what we're going to come to the second part, which, and I hesitate to use the word drama, but something unfolding within your life about your dad, about your father. Tell us about your dad.
Yeah, so I was in Vermont at the time, and I got a phone call saying that he had been taken into the hospital, which was not terribly unusual because he had been in and out of the hospital different times over the years for various different things.
Right.
The main thing was that he had a type of blood cancer since 2005. And so he had been through many different treatments of chemotherapy and radiation and everything like that. So I was at least somewhat familiar with the whole routine of going to the hospital and doing the treatment and everything like that. So he went into the hospital at the beginning of June, and I was told, it's nothing right now. We're just sort of doing some tests, and it's nothing to fret over. And he himself told me, do not come home, keep hiking, we'll stay in contact, and just...
How did you feel about that, Andrew? How did you feel about that? Did you want to get off then?
Well, initially I was, my first reaction was, okay, well, if I need to come home now, I will. But my dad and I had a very good relationship, and I trusted him completely. And so for him to tell me keep hiking, I knew that he would have been more upset if I came home than if I, followed his instruction.
Yeah, I'm sure he would have done. But did it affect your hike though yourself? Did it make you more concerned with what you were doing?
Yeah, at that point, I don't think so. No,
right.
Because I was still making good miles and still, in the routine of the hike, and sort of at that stage, the end was, just maybe starting to come into focus a little bit.
The end of your hike, you mean?
The end of my hike, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But
then your dad deteriorated, didn't he?
He did, yeah. So he was in the hospital for the whole month of June, and I would check in as often as I could, or as often as I had service. And he sort of was mostly stable until his health just very quickly deteriorated. I was at Crawford Notch in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, just shy of Mount Washington, and a buddy and I had gotten off the trail to go into town because of bad weather. And I was able to talk to him the night before, and then the next morning I texted with him actually, hey, I don't have great service here, but I should be able to call at lunch. And he was able to respond to that text. And then at lunch I called, and he didn't answer. And I got on the phone with my brother and sister, and there was a period of 2 or so hours or something where they were meeting with doctors, and just we weren't sure what exactly was going on. And then they called me and said, okay, you need to come home.
So how do you do that? Situation has not happened to me, and I'm sure it hasn't happened to a lot of people. I'm sure it has happened to quite a few people. How do you process that on your way home? That must be I guess you're kind of thinking, I just want him to be here by the time I get there. Is that how you felt?
Yes. Yeah, that's pretty much how I felt the whole way home. It was 10 and a half hours, a 10 and a half hours drive. So I was just very focused on making it home and just praying that he would still be alive until I got there.
Yeah. And was he?
He was, yes. So I got to the hospital about 2 a.m. and then we were able to be with him. And he knew that we were there with him my brother, sister, and I. And then he passed away at 2:45. So, yeah,
Wow.
but we were all able to be there together. And so we were.
It's almost like
Yep.
it's almost like he hung on for you, isn't it? Did it feel that way to you?
Yes. It did feel that way. And even then, talking with the nurses afterwards, they said, we are sort of off the books right now. We are just doing everything we can to keep him alive until your brother gets here. And yeah, thankfully he was there, and we were able to be with him right at the end.
And he was aware that you were there as well, was he?
He was, yes.
That's good. That's good.
Yep. We couldn't communicate with him very well, but we were able to tell that he was,
wow,
he was there with us.
Yeah. So you were off the trail now, and I presume you hung around. Obviously, you waited for the funeral, but you waited a bit longer, didn't you? How long were you actually away from the trail?
So I stayed home for 2 month. And,
you lost your legs.
I lost my legs. I never lost my appetite, but I lost my legs for sure.
Right.
So just with taking care of the house and different things, being with family and friends and everything. So it was a total of 2 months that I was home. Yep.
Did you always intend to go back, or as the weeks went on, did you start thinking, well, I don't think I'm going to go back now?
No, I always intended to go back. Number one, because I had made a promise to myself that I would finish, and number two, because before my dad had passed, I made a promise to him that I would finish. I didn't know when, but I did make that promise to him, and so that was something that I wanted to follow through on.
In that 45 minutes you had with him just before he passed, did you say you were going to go back?
I did. I said, I don't know when, Dad, but I promise I'll go back and finish the trail.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
So did your mindset change? I mean, obviously, the grief was there, obviously.
Yeah.
And you got back on.
Mm-hmm.
Had your mindset for hiking changed? Because certainly your legs would have changed, and going back into the White Mountains must have been a nightmare.
Yes, it was. Yep. That was brutal. Mount Washington was day 2, so going up.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good timing. Yeah.
But obviously, physically, it was very, very difficult to get back on just because of the terrain. Mentally, I would say it was difficult to be away from my family, but I was thankful to be sort of back, doing, working towards the goal that I had set for myself.
And were your family supportive of you going back?
They were, yes. They were very supportive of me going back. There were no reservations. Yep.
Did the trail seem different to you as well, or was it, because all your friends must have gone, obviously, unless they were incredibly slow?
Yeah. It was different. Obviously a whole new cast of characters. I didn't know anyone, and it was sort of unusual because they didn't know me, and so just in conversation they would there was no way to avoid telling why I was off the trail for 2 months or anything.
Of course.
So if people would ask questions, I would answer, but I wasn't out there just sort of spouting off my story.
Sure.
But anyway, I would say that the mindset seemed to be a little bit different. The whole mentality of the hikers, I think, was a little bit different. My first stint on the trail, I would say people were more driven and more likely to do bigger miles. And
the partiers had caught up with you, had they?
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to necessarily say those words, but I would say that the second group was maybe a little more relaxed and a little more willing to cut a day short if they found a good campsite or something like that. You know what?
There's nothing wrong with that either, is there?
That's true. Yeah, that is very true. Yep. Hike your own hike is the cliche, but that's what you have to do.
It's a cliche because it's entirely true.
Yeah, you're right.
And you've already mentioned, obviously, you prayed a lot. I suspect you prayed a heck of a lot more when you got back on as well. And did you feel that God gave you the answers you were looking for when you got back on?
Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer. I don't think so.
That's why I asked it.
That's why, yes. I don't think that I have an answer. I don't think I had one then. I don't think I have one now. but I know that I can trust in the Lord because He does have the answer. And so that's sort of where I land.
Okay. And I'm sure that gives everybody comfort. In a terrible time like that, if you got comfort from that, then it must be marvelous for you.
Yeah.
It must really have helped you in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you aimed for the same Katahdin Day that I had in 2014. Not because of me, by the way.
Yeah.
29th of September. And so I do know why you chose that day. Tell us why you chose the 29th of September.
Yeah, so my dad's birthday was the 29th of September. There was only one option, and it was to finish on that day.
Yeah, that must have been really emotional. Tell us what the day was like then.
It was, yeah. Well, I was very thankful that my family joined me. They were able to take off work, and my brother was he was going to do the whole 100-mile wilderness with me, but had some knee problems, so was not able to do it. But then everyone else was able to. So
he just did Katahdin with knee problems.
He did, yeah, just Katahdin with knee problems, yeah. He was a trooper, that's for sure.
Tell him he should have done the 100-mile wilderness only.
Yeah.
That would have been easier.
Yeah, it would have been, yeah. So yeah, it was a very special day because it was Dad's birthday and because I was able to finish the trail and to have my family there with me. It was a very special day. Yep. It was cold, sure. So we didn't spend much time up top, but it was special to have them there.
It doesn't matter how cold it is, though, does it really? It is still, It is so awesome when you get up there. The adrenaline is pumping through you and you're feeling so great to touch the sign. And for you particularly, with the emotion you must have had in the previous year, or in this last year, I guess, or the previous year, to have lost both your folks in that short period of time, the getting to that sign that you promised both of them you were going to do. I mean, I just couldn't imagine what that must be like. So, what did you take away from that whole experience? And I include everything. Was it a year in your life that enhanced your life, or because obviously you lost your parents, right. So it's a difficult thing to say. So how do you balance those things?
Yeah. Well, obviously it was a very difficult year, but I think it was a year of a lot of growth for me in my faith in the Lord. It was very challenging. I can't hide that fact. And still is, but the main lesson that I took from it, or that I take from being on the trail and just, struggles in life in general, is to just keep moving. Like we were saying earlier, you really only have one option, and that's to just keep pressing forward, to keep moving, to keep walking, and things will work themselves out. And if they don't, well, you just keep on moving.
Yeah, and even with the backdrop of losing both your folks in that period of time, there is still that alternative is still the only alternative, isn't it? You can't. There is no alternative to moving forward. Right. So, with that backdrop as well, you still move forward, and you got to the end. So I admire you for doing that. But look, you're right. You had a story to tell. It was when you were telling me about it, the other day. It was very very moving, and I really appreciate you reaching out and talking to me, because sharing something like that might just help one person. So I appreciate you coming on. Yeah,
thank you, Steve. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my story. Yeah.
Not at all. I'm going to ask you one last question, actually. Did the hike strengthen or weaken your faith?
I think the hike by itself strengthened my faith because of primarily because of just being in the Lord's creation and seeing all of the diversity in what He has made. That was the main thing that stood out to me. Yep. Just experiencing it in that way was so unique. Like living in the wilderness was very unique.
Sure. Oh, there's no question. It really is, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for sharing it, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve.
Take it easy.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Now, I know I'm probably biased, but I thought that was an important conversation. Coping with grief and a developing situation that's going on away from the trail must be so difficult. I thought that Andrew and his family handled it with a grace that must have been hard for all of them. The fact that he was able to see his dad before he passed must have been very special for him and motivated him towards finishing his goal on the top of Katahdin on his dad's birthday. Great story. Now, Let's hear from Anna Huthmaker, our very own trail dame and hostess of the podcast of the same name. Here's Anna. I'd like to introduce you to my friend, Anna Huthmaker, the trail dame herself, and the host of one of the Hiking Radio Network shows, the Trail Dames podcast. Hi, Anna. How are you?
Hey, Steve. I am fantastic.
You always are. You always.
Well, I usually I'm talking to you because I absolutely love the podcast. I love working together. I love what you do. So it always puts me in a really good mood.
Cool. So first off then, why don't you tell us and tell the listeners on the Mighty Blue Show about the Trail Dames and how they came into being in the first place?
Well, the Trail Dames, we call it a hiking club for women of a curvy nature. But what it really is it's an organization for women to get outdoors. And it started when I tried to do a thru hike of the Appalachian Trail years ago. And I just noticed that nobody looked like me out there. And back then, that was somebody that was overweight, a little out of shape, but had the very best of intentions. So I created Trail Dames for that kind of woman. But what has happened is that now Trail Dames is for every size of woman, every age, every shape, every background. But it's for women that maybe have never gotten out there and hiked before, who don't know much about the outdoors and wants to get out and make friends, make connections with other women, and see, oh gosh, just how beautiful this world is.
Well, wouldn't it be better renamed instead of for women of a curvy nature now? Should we say maybe women of a curious nature?
Well, several times people have suggested that we change the tagline, and I really fight against that because the truth is that a lot of women, and of course I'm coming from my own perspective with this, but a lot of women, if you're overweight, you immediately think that that is not a place for you.
Right.
And what I've found is that keeping the tagline shows that, yes, we are a place for those women. And then the other women, they just seem to come along for the ride and they're very happy. And we have very thin, very athletic women. However, the first and foremost thing is if you believe you don't belong out there, I am the group for you. We are the group for you. And so that's why I kind of don't ever want to change that.
Oh, cool! I think that's a very fair response as well, and I think I know you're terribly encouraging with all the women who go there, and I've heard about your stories and when I edit the show as well. So now you were a guest on my show some time ago because I first heard about you. Remember, if you recall, the reason I heard about you, I think it was Jan Lights who told me about this crazy woman who does this dance, the dance of a not a dance of a mad woman, but
the dance of the real woman.
The dance of the real woman. I thought it was a mad woman, but dance of the real woman. That's right. And I wanted to interview, and I loved your attitude and so on. And I suggested you do the podcast, and now you've been doing it for over a year, quite a lot over a year now. So, are you happy with the response to your show? I mean, how has it gone so far?
Oh, I'm actually really happy. Of course, I feel like the entire world is one big audience waiting to happen.
Right.
And I want it to be bigger and bigger because I think that what we have is of such value to women to listen to us and be inspired and motivated by the unbelievable guests. But I have to tell you, it's such an interesting thing because it never occurred to me to do a podcast. I listened to podcasts, but until you invited me to be on your show, I had not been a guest. And I've now since been guests on several shows. And when you came up with this great idea of a Trail Days podcast, it was just kind of out of the blue. And I thought, me? Like, how would I do that? And it's been a remarkable learning curve, but it's been so much fun. And I'm just madly in love with the entire process now. I want to do it all the time.
I know you are. I see, because both you and Jester, on our new Section Hiking podcast, the two of you are scheduling recordings the whole time. I keep looking at. In fact, I can't fit my recordings in now. I had to tell Jester I was about to put back one of my recordings the other day because she was already on at 7:30 that night. So
be careful, Steve.
I know. I think I've woken the beast in both of you. I think, yeah. So how do you choose your guests? Are they all trail dames or are they people from outside trail dames? What are you looking for in terms of guests?
Okay, so for me, it's pretty easy. They are not all trail dames in terms of being an active member of the organization. Now, I'm kind of one of these people that I believe that any woman out on the trail is a trail dame at heart. However, like For me, this is so easy. If I see something in a woman that inspires me or motivates me, or even better yet, like if I just want to be her best friend, you know that feeling like when you're a 13-year-old girl and you meet the cool girl and you're like, I want,
No, not really.
okay. Well, the women that are listening to this are all
Right,
nodding their
okay.
head going, yeah, I remember that feeling. So
Yeah.
when I meet those women or I hear them somewhere or I read something about them, I'm like, oh, I just want to know more and I want to hear more about their story and their experience. So the podcast gives me the perfect opportunity to reach out. Some would say stalk, but reach
Got
out
to do that.
and say, hey, come and tell your story and let other women hear about your experiences.
Yeah, that's very cool. Have you been surprised yourself by some of the stories that you've heard?
You know, um, yes and no. I mean, if I already see something in you and invite you to be on the podcast, if you bring back a very rich story, I'm not surprised because I already saw that in you to begin with.
Right.
What's really neat is when I have a preconceived notion, when I think somebody's going to be really brave, but they end up also having a great sense of humor. Or if I think someone's going to be funny, but they also have something really touching and moving. That is so exciting to me. And I can't tell you how often we'll be in the middle of an interview and I just get covered in goosebumps and I think, what a special conversation I'm getting to be a part of. And so that I don't get tired of, and it might take me by surprise, but I'm not surprised that the possibility is there.
Yeah, you often tell me, you text me, say you've got to listen to this one. Make sure you put this one forward as soon as possible. It's a really good interview. So, I know how you feel. I think sometimes, and one of the things that I feel about my show, and I feel very much about your show as I edit your show, I think that everybody has such a different story, don't they? There is not one story that's anything like another story. And it's the same with your show, and it's going to be the same with Julie's show as well. And any other shows we do, everybody does this differently. And everybody has a valid story to tell, I feel anyway.
Absolutely. And that's right there. That is such the important part when you say that everybody has a story, because I can't tell you how often I've just been hiking along with somebody and we're having a conversation and they tell me something and I go, hey, would you come on the podcast and record that? Because that's really neat. And they always go, oh, well, there's nothing special about that or what I did. But it is. It really, really is. And every single person's got something to share. And so that's kind of
Absolutely.
what I really love about the whole podcast issue is that, you can dig out those stories and help people share them.
Sure. And I know how, obviously, I know how your shows are scheduled, and certainly some of our listeners listen to your shows as well. But for those who don't know, how do you schedule the shows? How often are they up? And I know there are two different types of shows, so tell people about those.
So it's been really interesting because the entire thing's been a learning curve for me as I figure it out. And what we've settled into now is every month right now, I have one big interview, and that happens, I believe, the fourth, excuse
Fourth Tuesday.
fourth Tuesday on every month. And so,
Yep.
because I record them and I send them to Steve to
Pay attention.
he
Pay
works his
attention.
magic. And that's the big interview. That's where I, get to talk to somebody for a long time and hear their story. And also as part of that, I share my own trail journals at the end of that. And so that's an ongoing story, which is a lot of fun. Then once a month, on the second Tuesday of every month, I release what we call a lanyap. And a lanyap is a little small something special, kind of just to brighten your day, maybe to educate you. And sometimes it's talking about something like water purification on the trail, something that's just that you need to know about. Other times it might be a book review of an outdoor book I've found that's extraordinary. Sometimes it's lists of great DVDs that you should watch or documentaries. It could be any kind of a thing, and that's normally just me.
Yeah, I've just actually edited a lanyard, which I've just finished just before I called you, actually, which is going to go out tomorrow, which is, I think, the 10th. Yeah, tomorrow, December the 10th. And that is about the gifts for hikers, holiday gifts for hikers. So that's a very appropriate show for all hikers, not just women, isn't it?
Absolutely. And here's something, if you have trouble buying gifts for the women that you love out there, or actually any hiker or outdoor person, it's a great thing to listen to because I find things that are like cheap, like $10 or $15. I find things that are $500, and I find things
Yeah.
that cost nothing. But if you're looking for some gift ideas, it's not particularly long. It will give you some really great places to start.
Yeah, very cool. Really cool. So now I know that we're looking for sponsors for the show at the moment. Is there a good fit with any particular type of company as far as you're concerned? Who do you think would be a good company for you?
That's a
Don't name names, by the way, but types.
That is a great question, and I guess probably as, a podcast person, you should say that any advertiser is a great fit. But I have to tell you, I really believe that advertisers that believe in the power of the trail, that believe in the power of the outdoors to bring people together, advertisers who know that the stories we share are important. If you're looking for an audience that wants a story with their product, that wants a purpose behind what you have to sell, we are a great audience for that. We don't just want some regular good old fashioned thing you could buy at the grocery store. We want you to have something special to offer. And if you have that to offer and you come on our podcast to advertise it, you're going to find people go out there and buy it and also share it with their other friends and family.
That's important. I agree with that. So anybody who's interested in advertising with the show, either contact me, steve@hikingradionetwork.com, or info@traildames.com, which is Anna's email, obviously, for the Trail Dames. And you'll get a response, obviously, and we'd love to hear from you. But what about plans for the future of the show, Anna? Are you thinking of doing different things in 2020?
Yeah, we're actually getting ready to do something to add something really special to the podcast. So, I talk about stories all the time. And one of the things I notice when I'm out hiking with all my friends is just these random little stories that people tell. They can be 5 or 6 minutes long, 12 minutes long, but they're always fun, or they are moving or touching, or they share something special that happened to them when they were out on a trail. So we're getting ready to start every other week dropping a story. And it's not going to be me. It's just a woman. She'll tell you her name and she'll say, and here's my story. And we've got some fantastic ones already recorded about the first time you ever solo hiked and things like that. And so I'm very excited about that because I want to, again, just share more women's voices.
So we're basically going to do, the Lagniappe's on the second Tuesday of the month, and the main big interview is on the fourth Tuesday. So on the first and third Tuesdays, we'll put out another Trail Dames thing with just the story. And Anna has shared with me an audio background of the forest. And I'm practicing at the moment, having the Trail Dame tell her story with sounds of the forest in the background. It sounds pretty good on some of them, most of them actually. So we'll just see how it works out.
Well, I tell you what would be really cool, and it's not really doable, but if you want to know what a Trail Dames hike sounds like ever out on the trail, if you close your eyes and you imagine the sound of women laughing through the woods. And that is, I always say that that's the soundtrack of Trail Dames, is the sound of women laughter. Like I'm always at the back of the hike and I can hear it ringing down through the trees. Unfortunately, you can't really do that in the background of a podcast, but I do want everybody to kind of close their eyes and imagine that when you're listening, because that's what you would hear on a Trail Dames hike.
I'll see if I can find a recording of a bunch of women laughing. How will that work? All right, Adam. Well, look, lovely to talk to you. Thanks so much for doing the show. Obviously, I love you, and I hope you have a happy Christmas. And we'll talk soon anyway.
All right, and thank you so much for the opportunity. You just can't even know what it means to me. So.
Okay, honey. Take it easy.
Bye, sweetie.
Bye. Bye.
She really is a sweetheart and devoted to her cause. She is so enthusiastic about hikers, hiking and her dames, and I hope that some of you who haven't listened to the show will give it a shot. As we said, the latest show is about hiking gifts for the holidays, so everybody should go to hikingradionetwork.com and listen to the Trail Dames and all of our shows. Finally this week, Chapter 15 of Paul Stutzman's Hiking Through, during which Paul suffers a storm the likes of which I have never seen on the trail. And so I'm jolly glad that I haven't. I'll see you next week. Chapter 15. The Storm. The Bear's Den Hostel was one of the most comfortable and elegant on my entire hike. The building is a Tudor-style stone mansion, built in 1933 by local stonemasons and formerly the home of a Washington, D.C. doctor and his opera singer wife. Now the mansion-turned hostel offers accommodations for 26 wayfarers. I left reluctantly in the morning. Back on the trail, I hiked slowly, enjoying the views along Bears Den Rocks. Half a mile later, I was walking the shoulder of Virginia Route 7 in the deliciously named Snickers Gap. Then into the woods again, off on a 20-mile stroll on a delightful Sunday in June. White mountain laurel bloomed brilliantly in the morning sunshine. The blossoms of these bushes are small and cup-like, as though offering a deep drink of their beauty. A photographer had set up his tripod along the trail and was busy snapping photos. I stopped to chat and found that he photographed the wildflowers of the Appalachian Trail as a hobby and had some of his work published in several prominent magazines. My obvious interest in the wildflowers of the trail encouraged him to explain the similarities and differences of mountain laurel, azaleas and the rhododendron. All three are poisonous, he cautioned. I didn't tell him about my eating habits, but I decided it might be wise to discontinue my wildflower sampling. The blossoming everywhere distracted me. I had my nose stuck in every flower I passed. My usual attention to the trail floated away on the sweet scents of the morning, and I never saw the root that trapped the tip of my hiking pole while my body and pack continued moving forward. The pole was strapped to my wrist, and the tip was lodged firmly under the root. Something had to give, and it wasn't the root or the pole. My body did an about-face, and before I had a chance to react, I was on the ground. My pole now resembled the letter C. I tried straightening it over my knee and used a little more persuasion from a rock, but then it looked like a lightning bolt. Hopefully I could find an outfitter in Harper's Ferry who would supply me with a vise to further straighten the pole. At Crescent Rock, I paused on the high rock formation and enjoyed my final view over the vast and beautiful Shenandoah Valley. Shortly before noon, I took a break at the David Lesser Memorial Shelter. My body was demanding nourishment, and the shelter was conveniently close to the trail. I relaxed, my feet propped up, and reflected on the milestones I'd reached. I had left Virginia that morning and entered West Virginia, my fifth state. I had also just passed the 1,000-mile point. 2 months ago at Springer Mountain, 1,000 miles seemed an impossible dream. Yet by getting up each morning and stubbornly hiking north one step at a time, I'd walked that dream into reality. And here I was, with over 1,000 miles behind me. Yes, I'll admit it, it felt good. The day was hot and humid, and I needed more water. My guidebook showed a spring another 0.2 of a mile down a steep grade, but there was also a gas station with a deli at Keys Gap, 3 miles farther down the trail. I would get food and water there. Walking up Route 9 in Keys Gap, I saw the dark cloud moving in from the east. The skies opened just as I reached the store, and I took shelter under the awning over the gas pumps as hail and rain pounded above and around me. Things were looking up. I'd finally managed to avoid a downpour. One of the greatest pleasures on my hike was being safe and dry in a shelter during a storm. I had been unfortunate thus far. I was usually on the trail when storms hit, and I absolutely despised being drenched by the rain. On September the 10th, 2002, shortly after we received the verdict on Mary's cancer, I had visited Harper's Ferry while she spent time with our youngest daughter. Now, almost 6 years later, I was remembering those days as I hiked toward the little mountain town. I had chosen to come here then because it offered something to think about other than our sadness. I had visited the historic St. Peter's Catholic Church, where I had knelt in prayer for our family. As I crossed the ridge at Loudon Heights on this June Sunday, Harper's Ferry opened up before me and my dream had come to pass. I remembered that day in 2002 when I had looked up into these hills and promised myself that someday I would come hiking out of the woods, cross the bridge over the river and walk into town on my own AT hike. I had no inkling of the enormity of my wish, nor did I have any idea what circumstances would bring me back. But I was there now, about to realise my goal of walking into Harper's Ferry, knowing exactly what lay between Springer Mountain and this town. From the ridge, a steep descent on switchbacks brought me ever closer to the bridge over the Shenandoah. The path went through a ravine filled with wild purple periwinkle, and I emerged from the woods. I stopped before crossing the bridge. In my mind, I saw a man standing on the other side, looking wistfully up into the hills. He resembled me, except that his hair was combed and he had no beard. He was 40 pounds heavier, although with my backpack included, we weighed about the same. I crossed the Shenandoah River and felt like I was coming home. Part of that feeling was because I knew I'd fulfilled a dream. But for weeks now, my mind had linked Harper's Ferry with home for several reasons. In this town, I was just a little over 5 hours from my home in Ohio, and it was as close to home as I would ever be during my trek to Maine. Ina, my trail boss, planned to meet me here in Harper's Ferry for a day, and it would be the last time I would see anyone from home until I finished my journey 2 months from now. Every step beyond Harper's Ferry would take me farther away from home. Thinking about leaving the town and continuing northward, I felt a sadness. I was ready to go home. Even if I quit here, one part of my brain argued, it will still be an accomplishment. Not many people hike 1,000 miles. I toyed with the idea of going home for just 1 week to rest and visit my children and grandchildren. You won't come back, said another part of my brain. This trail had opened my world. I had hoped for new experiences, new people, new ideas, and a new conversation with God. The first 1,000 miles had already exceeded my expectations, and as I debated going onward, I wondered, what more is there? What else could there possibly be that God wants to show me? The stubborn part of my brain echoed my dad's voice, repeating words he had often quoted to his children. Whatever you do, do with your might. Things done by half are never done right. The journey was only half done. I must continue. No matter how much home tugged, I knew I had to finish this hike. Crossing the river, I nodded a perfunctory howdy to my imaginary past self at the end of the bridge. Then I headed up the trail toward Jefferson Rock and St. Peter's Church. For a long time I had pictured myself going back into that church. On the spot where I'd begged God's help, I planned to thank him for allowing Mary to be with us 4 more years after her diagnosis. I went up the steps, through the stone arches, and ignoring the closed sign standing guard, I pulled at the carved wooden door. It was locked. Dropping my pack, I knelt right there by the front door and prayed. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy headquarters is just a short walk up High Street. At the headquarters, thru-hikers take their photographs for publication in a book documenting that year's class of hikers, much like a school yearbook. I posed for the picture and filled out brief personal information. I was hiker number 191. Back at Springer Mountain, I had been hiker number 391, heading north. Somewhere along those 1,000 miles, I'd passed 200 of my fellow sojourners. On High Street, I passed an outfitting store. I asked inside if they could help with my crippled hiking pole, but found that my Lecky hiking poles were under warranty for life. A helpful clerk replaced the bent sections with 2 new sections at no cost. I congratulated myself on paying a little extra for quality hiking gear. Later, in my room, I went through every article in my backpack. I would send home all my winter gear. Anything that I did not need every day would go home with Ina, including my hat, gloves, fleece, and my 5-degree sleeping bag. I had purchased a much lighter 45-degree sleeping bag at the outfitter. I even briefly considered sending home my rain gear, but I decided to keep it and stuffed it into the bottom of my pack. When all was said and done, I had relieved my pack of 6 pounds and would head north feeling much lighter. Einstein left me a phone message that Sir Enity was sick and would take several days off the trail, and that he himself would not be in town for another day. We 3 had planned to meet in Harper's Ferry, but I decided not to wait for my friends. I'd already taken 1 0-day here, and they could catch up with me later. As I manoeuvred my way through Harper's Ferry, back again on the trail northward, I was assaulted with mixed feelings. As much as I wanted to go home for a break, I had decided to finish the hike and not take the chance of never returning. I also knew there was no more debating. 1,000 miles before, Mount Katahdin had seemed impossible, but now there was no going back. I walked down Shenandoah Street, made a right at the edge of town, and passed under a trestle to a path that led to the Potomac River. A footbridge crossed the river, and then the trail turned onto the Chesapeake and Ohio towpath. For several miles I walked along the old towpath, the Potomac on my right and the abandoned canal on my left. Dozens of turtles sunned themselves on logs jutting out of the murky canal waters. I felt like a new hiker. I carried a noticeably lighter pack, my pole was straight, and I had new tyres. A second pair of New Balance shoes were on my feet, and I dodged last night's puddles, attempting to keep my new shoes dry. I was hiking with a new state of mind and in a new state of the Union. The Potomac River marks the border between Maryland and West Virginia. I had spent 1 month crossing Virginia, but only 1 day hiking West Virginia. Maryland has the second shortest section of trail, only 40 miles, which meant I would cross Maryland and enter Pennsylvania in only a few days. Entering a new state was always my most encouraging measure of progress. Even though measurement by mileage was much more realistic, I felt a sense of accomplishment when I left one state and moved on to the next. Now, in less than a week, I would progress from state number 4 to state number 7. The morning was heavy and humid as I left the C&O towpath and started my climb toward Weatherton Cliffs. Many switchbacks later, I enjoyed a view of the Potomac River flowing through a gorge far in the distance. Just before noon, the trail led into Gathland State Park. I stopped at a 50-foot stone memorial dedicated to Civil War journalists, sat on a nearby park bench and kicked off my shoes. Back in Harper's Ferry, I bought a huge sandwich, and this seemed a good spot for a leisurely lunch break. I admit I was influenced somewhat by the nearby Coke machine. A cold Coke and a turkey sandwich on a park bench. You call this hiking? I inserted my money and pressed the button, and a fruit drink dropped out. Disgusted, I tried again, and another cherry drink clunked down. 2 disappointing fruit drinks and a turkey sandwich later, I lazily gathered my stuff and started back down the trail. I had no warning that I was about to be swallowed up by the worst storm I have ever seen. Nearing Fox Gap, I heard distant rumbling. I'd walked through so many showers that I'd often forego rain gear and let the rain soak me, hoping to dry out later in sunshine. But for some odd reason, this day's rumbling compelled me to dig out my gear as well as put the protective cover over my backpack. In a small clearing in Fox Gap, a monument honours Major General Jesse Reno, killed nearby in the Battle of South Mountain during the Civil War. I stopped to read the plaque on the memorial, and without warning, a blast of wind nearly knocked me off my feet. I ran across the clearing to the trail leading into the woods, thinking that under the tree canopy I might find some cover from a downpour. But in seconds, shrieking winds drove rain and hail through the woods so violently that there was no shelter anywhere. I could barely see the trail through the whiteout of rain and ice. Trees bent and twisted in the wind, and I knew I must get away from the trail and these writhing trees. I ran into a small incline off to the right, topped by a fence row along an open field. Fighting my way up the bank, I looked for protection, some shield to break the ferocity of the storm. A cluster of prickly bushes seemed thick enough to shelter me, and I crouched in them, covering my head. But the winds blasted through the bushes, and a white sheet of rain and hail pummeled my body. I heard trees crash into the ground, a branch hurtled through the air, striking my head. There was no refuge, and I knew I was in deep trouble. The woods were not safe, but where to go? In the open field, branches and leaves and other debris swirled in crazy hysteria, as the wind snatched up and flung away anything it could grab. A lone maple stood in the centre of the field. Its branches were twisting and tossing, but the tree seemed young and supple enough to withstand the violence of the wind. I remembered the giant trees uprooted by a storm in the Smoky Mountains. They had looked so large and indestructible, yet they were too rigid and could not bend enough to withstand a huge wind. Their roots had been set in rocks, not reaching deep enough to hold firm. This maple in the middle of the field should have a good root system, I reasoned. I bent low and ran through ankle-deep water to the tree. The wind was almost a physical being, charging against me, pushing me back. When I reached the tree, I grabbed the trunk and held on, wrapping both arms tightly around it. The monster storm howled around me. The wind whipped through the field, and both lightning and thunder crashed simultaneously and constantly. It was just a matter of time until the tree blew over, or I could no longer hold on and was blown away. I slid slowly to my knees, hugging the trunk, and begged God to save my life. I knew there was a very good chance I would die right there in that field. I was terrified of the storm, but I was not terrified of dying. I actually felt peace with the possibility. I clung to the tree, on my knees in streaming water, wind tearing at my body, rain and hail pounding me. I hung on. I knew God was there, and I knew that even if this storm killed me, all would be well. The winds slowly quieted. I was not going to die or be blown away. When I thought it was safe to return to the trail, I splashed back into the woods and was stunned by the damage. Splintered trees lay across the trail, sometimes hiding it completely. Branches littered the path, and at times I could find no guiding white blazes. More than once, I crawled through the branches of downed trees or walked to the bridge of a downed tree trunk to find my way along the trail. If I had stayed in the woods, I would not have escaped being hit or even crushed by flying and falling timber. Even the low spring undergrowth looked beaten and weary. Less than a mile later, I stumbled into the Dahlgren Backpack Campground, a small campground that had a block building with showers and restrooms. I had been that close to shelter. 2 hikers had taken refuge from the storm inside the block building. When I walked in, I could see incredulity on their faces. "You were out in that?" they exclaimed. Yes, it was the most terrifying experience I've ever had. I sat down, thankful for human company and a place to rest, trying to regain my calm before I continued my hike. For the next several miles I walked through a path of destruction. From Turner's Gap to Washington Monument State Park, the trail was often buried under fallen branches and trees. As I picked my way over, under and around, I wondered if there were other hikers who had been without refuge in the storm. In Washington Monument State Park, I climbed a 30-foot stone tower and had a view over Boonesboro, Maryland. I heard sirens in the distance, emergency vehicles dealing with the storm's aftermath. Climbing over one fallen tree, I was suddenly past the storm's devastation. White mountain laurel blossoms graced the path, and the trail was clear. I will forever question every choice I made that morning. What if I had waited for my friends in Harper's Ferry? What if I had left town 1 hour earlier? What if I had not stopped for a lunch break at the War Memorial? I might have avoided being caught in the middle of that storm. But perhaps I was exactly where God wanted me to be. I saw the enclosed footbridge and heard the traffic. The caged path led over I-70, where no one in the ceaseless flow of cars had an inkling of the destruction in the forest. 1.5 miles later, my day ended at Pine Knob Shelter. I'd hiked 24 miles, even with the storm trying to stop me. And for some reason, that new pair of shoes I had so carefully protected from puddles only that morning were now soaked. 2 other hikers were staying at the shelter. They had heard the storm in the distance, but were fortunate enough to be ahead of it. I described what they had missed. Hanging my rain gear on a wooden peg at the front of the shelter, I discovered a hole torn in my pants by the prickly bushes where I had tried to take refuge. A good spring flowed near the shelter, and I filtered my water and cooked a meal. It was already dark when I finally unrolled my new sleeping bag for the first time. It wasn't much more than a blanket, and I was happy for the pair of Patagonia long johns I had decided to keep. I was warm and safe. What more could a person want? The following day, a hiker told me of news reports of 70-mile-an-hour winds and tornado sightings, and I told him, yes, I was aware that there had been a storm. This day, too, was hot and humid, and by the middle of the afternoon, when I arrived at Penmar Park, a pleasant tree-filled area with picnic tables and a pavilion, I was happy to stop for a rest. The park straddles the Maryland-Pennsylvania border, and views from the pavilion look out over a plain of farmland stretching for miles. I met an old caretaker who was roaming the grounds on a golf cart, and he offered to get me 2 soft drinks. With drinks in hand, I spotted a swing and sat down, kicked off my shoes, and swung away for some time. The sound of thunder interrupted my rest, and I headed for the pavilion. From there, I watched the lightning flash over the vast plain. Rain poured down, and I thought about the vagaries of our choices and sometimes disproportionate consequences. My lazy swing ride here had delayed my journey long enough that I was now under a roof safe and dry, avoiding this latest storm. While waiting out the storm, I consulted my guidebook, wondering where I could camp that night. 5 miles ahead were 2 shelters, side by side, named Deer Lick Shelters. That would be my goal. My eye caught an interesting fact in the guidebook. A thru-hiker will climb and descend a total of 91 miles on his hike from Georgia to Maine. That's an elevation gain and loss, the equivalent of climbing Mount Everest almost 17 times. No wonder I huffed and puffed and my legs ached. Thinking about climbing Everest 17 times, I left Penmar Park and soon arrived in William Penn's territory, my 17th state, Pennsylvania. That night at camp, I overheard a hiker describing to several others what a terrible storm he had walked through the day before. "Were you in Washington Park during that storm?" I asked. "I was caught in the middle of it, and I wish I had pictures to prove what I went through," he replied. "I thought I was going to die." "I can prove it to you." I brought out my camera and showed them pictures of the storm's destruction. While he had endured the violent weather, hikers just a few miles north were completely unaware of the storm. By noon the following day, I had already hiked 13 miles. When the trail crossed US 30, a colourful page tacked to a tree caught my attention, and I was immediately led astray by the pictures. Beautiful images of Italian food, all kinds of alluring delicacies for which I had no resistance. I headed down Route 30 quicker than you can say spaghetti. Tormina's Italian restaurant did not disappoint, and I soon had salad, garlic bread, and a steaming bowl of spaghetti in front of me. It sure beat the peanut butter and pita bread I had planned to eat. Loaded with calories, I went back to the trail and hiked longer and stronger than ever. I knew that if I didn't slow down, Einstein and Serenity would never catch up with me. A day later, several miles outside of Pine Grove Furnace State Park, I reached a major milestone in my trek. I officially passed the halfway point. Springer Mountain was 1,088.4 miles behind me. Katahdin was 1,087.8 miles ahead. That milestone called for a celebration. At noon, I walked into Pine Grove Furnace State Park and stopped at a small general store for a thru-hiker tradition, the half-gallon ice cream challenge. Anyone who finishes the challenge is awarded a little wooden spoon. For me, the word challenge is as irresistible as the word food. Just being able to accomplish anything labelled a challenge is reward enough. Entries in the journal inside the store, though, indicated that completion of this task was not always a pleasant experience. My choice was a half-gallon of Hershey's chocolate ice cream. I would have liked chocolate syrup with it, but the store had none. I washed down the ice cream with 16 ounces of Mountain Dew. All went surprisingly well. I enjoyed all but the last 10 bites, and in 38 minutes the ice cream was gone. Surprisingly, I was still hungry, so I followed the ice cream and Mountain Dew with a cheeseburger. I did not feel much like hiking that afternoon, so I checked in at the Ironmaster's mansion and then joined several other hikers for a swim in nearby Fuller Lake. This area was the site of the Pine Grove Furnace years ago. Fuller Lake was a former iron ore quarry that eventually filled with groundwater. In the evening, the proprietor of the Ironmaster's Mansion hostel gave us a tour. The mansion had been a stop on the Underground Railroad, moving slaves north to freedom. We dropped through a small trapdoor in a closet and stood in subterrestrial rooms where fugitives had often gone into hiding. A Girl Scout troop was also staying at the hostel. The girls and their sponsors joined us on the tour and afterward prepared themselves a Mexican feast. The aromas drove us hikers crazy. We kept drifting by their table, looking as sad and undernourished as we possibly could. Yes, I did have a cheeseburger, a soda, and a half-gallon of ice cream still rattling around my digestive system. Finally, the invitation came. "Hey, you hikers, we have lots of leftover food. Do you want any?" We were in that kitchen until every morsel had disappeared. That night, as I slowly lowered myself into my bunk, my stomach made strange rumbling noises. Apparently, I was in the middle of an area with a long history of making cast iron products, and those rumblings were just the normal noises of a cast iron stomach.